everybody, and welcome to Machtails from the Cantina Live. We have a very, very special show this evening. We are going to be celebrating the 40th anniversary of Star Trek's Wrath of Khan. Now, I was with my good friend Jimmy Mack last night, and he goes, I didn't think you were a Star Trek guy. And I need to explain, because we've done a lot of Star Wars stuff on this show. It's kind of my first attempt at a Star Trek flavored topic, if you will. And I have some really special guests that are good friends of mine that are going to, I guess, tell me what's on their mind about such a masterpiece of a film. You know, this month marks the 40th anniversary of the passing away of my father. And Star Trek, to me, had always reminded me of my dad. You know, Star Trek was before Star Wars, as we know. My dad was a fan of that franchise. I remember him watching it on TV a lot. So I always have these warm, fuzzy feelings when I hear Star Trek, because it reminds me of some really cool things about my father. So the Star Trek 2, not Star Trek Part 2, but Star Trek was actually mentioned a handful of times in The Force Among Us. So the drinking word of tonight is going to be Trek. So drink responsibly, but drink like you're having a drink with Captain Kirk on his birthday. Without further ado, I would like to bring on my guests. We have the Tenudos. We have Jason Swink from Rebel Force Radio. And we also have the man that started the Star Trek fan club in his parents' basement, Dan Manson. Guys, welcome to the show.
Hi, guys, everybody. Nice to be on with you all.
I have to tell you, cheers to you guys. I have to tell you that it's been so long since I had seen this film that I had seen it with virgin eyes, if you will. I had not, there were a lot of things from this film that I had not remembered because it has been so long. This film seems to be the fan favorite, the way that I see it as an outsider looking in. I wanted to get your take on what you thought about this film. Let's start from the first time you had seen this. And John and Dan, Mary Jo, you guys were there a little bit before I was. So you were, Dan, especially you were in the middle of this second film coming out. Can you describe what you thought of the film when you had seen it for the first time, and the hype around this film as well?
Definitely. I mean, well, the hype around it, you know, everybody kept questioning and wondering. I mean, they'd heard the rumors that Spock was going to die. And so that got a lot of people in an uproar. You know, a lot of fans were upset about that. But I had just started the fan club, and so it really helped me get the fan club taken off. You know, I was able to get some of the very first photos that were ever released for Star Trek II to print in the newsletter, and it was a newsletter then; it hadn't become a magazine yet. Yeah, you know, I mean, I still remember going to a local theater here, and there was a line all the way outside the building, all the way out into the parking lot. And I had printed up all of these flyers promoting the fan club, and I just had a friend with me, and we went down the line and we gave every single person a flyer so that they would know all about the fan club. And that was the screening, the first screening that I had gone, because it was the first showing here at the theater I was local to. Yeah, and I just remember watching that movie and being just completely and utterly blown away, and then in tears watching Spock's death scene, which really got to me. And I just, you know, it still to this day, it's my favorite of all the Star Trek films. I love many others, but none come as close to as this one does for me. I'm one of the original guys that still loves Star Trek the motion picture too. I adore that movie. I have so many good memories around it. So it's right behind this one. But as far as pure enjoyment, I just watched this movie a month ago again, and man, it holds up. It's still a powerful, really well done movie.
Yeah, I thought it was ahead of its time. I mean, watching it, last week for the first time in a long time, uh, it feels timeless, and the emotion that it had, especially with Spock's death, um, was, I don't know. I feel like they did it then with the emotion and dealing with death and the meaning of life kind of thing. There's some really good one-liners in there. Just the mentality, the way that Kirk thinks. Um, it's a movie that makes you think, and it's a movie that makes you feel. Jason, what was your take on it when you had first seen this film?
Well, I saw it on Betamax. That was the first time I saw it. I found Star Trek through Star Wars. It was 1985 and Star Wars was winding down, and we didn't have a VCR at the time in the house. We had to rent one, and my mom would rent a VCR every weekend. And I think she really got tired of renting Return of the Jedi for me every week. And so she grabbed Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, and brought that home. And I watched it. And this is 1985, and I was about 8 years old. And I thought, wait a minute. This is really good. This is very cool. But there's another part of the story that I didn't know. And of course, that was Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And not only did I not know that, but I also didn't know that these were the same guys, and this was the same sort of story that was being shown every weekend at 6 p.m. on Saturdays and Sundays in my city, in syndication. So it just the whole world of Star Trek blew up for me, having seen Search for Spock. And my uncle was one of these early adopters, had the Laserdisc before everyone else, had the VHS, had the Betamax, went through it all. So when he found out that I had seen the Search for Spock, he goes, well, you got to come over and see Star Trek 2. So I went over, and my cousins, they were warning me from the beginning that there were these things that they put in their ears. And they said, you might want to look away. You don't want to see this. But I was so hooked. And from that, it was really that movie that made Captain Kirk a hero to me. Very different from Luke Skywalker and, the Star Wars characters that I was so familiar with as a kid. Kirk was something very, very different. And I don't think that there is a performance by William Shatner that better defines the character of James T. Kirk than Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And I do have to say, I look around at this panel, I'm like, how am I here? I look at the godfather of organized fandom, Dan Madsen, the brilliant Tenutos who are, scholars of this stuff. So I'm happy to be here for that. Then I look at Chris and I go, oh yeah, that's why I'm here. So,
well, and I appreciate you being here.
It's an honor. But yeah, I mean, for me, Star Trek 2 is, it's my Star Trek. And I know that there's been a lot written over the years about the difference between Gene Roddenberry's more pure idea of Star Trek versus the Nick Meyer take on it that we got with Star Trek 2, and I think the subsequent films. But Star Trek 2 epitomizes my Star Trek and what I love the most about the franchise.
Jason, I heard that you were a big fan of the franchise, and I know we love listening to you on Rebel Force Radio, and I know that is pretty Star Wars specific. So I wanted to have you on the show to kind of get a fresh fan.
Fair and balanced. That's what we're looking for, right?
Yes. John and Mary Jo, how about you guys? Your first take on this, and what you thought? How old were you when you had seen this, John? I know you're a little older than me, so you had seen this probably in the theater, I'm assuming. What was your experience when it first came out?
Well, yeah, I saw it on opening night, June 4th, 1982 at the Esquire Theater in Chicago. But it was kind of a special memory for me. I was going to go away that summer and be away from my parents for about 6 weeks. So my parents said to me, pick things for us to do before you go away, because they weren't going to see me for a while. So with my mom, I went to see E.T. And I picked Star Trek 2 to go see with my dad. Now, I did not know it was opening night. I just picked it because I had seen Star Trek the motion picture. I had enjoyed it. I had, had watched the animated show when I was a little kid and watched the TV show, and I was certainly a fan, but I wasn't committed both committed as I should be committed in an institution because of my love of it now, and committed as a committed fan until I went to the theater that night because I not only got introduced to Star Trek on the big screen, I got introduced to Star Trek fans that night because I remember just being in the bathroom, hearing the chatter in the bathroom of the crowd that had left the show before and was, and we were going in and the crowd in line and the crowd, and all of a sudden I discovered a whole community of people who liked this thing as much as I did. And so it was also just a special memory of my dad and I. And so then I became, devoted. In fact, I ran out. Actually, when I went to see E.T. with my mom, I ran out and I got this. So this is my This is my Rathacon novelization, which I'm proud to say is signed by Vonda McIntyre, there, who wrote the book. And it was great when we were writing our book, the making of Rathacon. One of the things we got to talk about was the making of this book, which was a nice full circle for me because this was kind of a big deal. They couldn't figure out how to release this book and keep the secret about Spock, and there was all these mechanisms that they went through on how can we do it? Maybe we can release the book, but hold back the last chapter. Then people bring their receipt back and they get the last chapter because they wanted to keep it a secret. So that was a great summer, 82. There were such great movies that came out. And I loved Rathacon and I love it very much. I have great fond memories of my dad and I with this film. And also, it's just a great film. It is the Empire Strikes Back of Star Trek, right? It's if we're drawing a parallel. And I was thinking what Jason was talking about with Star Wars and Star Trek. Star Wars, of course, is very archetypal. Heroes are archetypal, but Star Wars isn't science fiction, right? I mean, really, it's something else. It's a mixture of things, but it's a lot more in the fantasy genre than the science fiction genre. Although there are robots and lasers and all that, it's not because the people in Star Wars are us metaphorically. The people in Star Trek are us. The people in Star Trek are our grandchildren, and they are supposed to be us. And so it takes on a different element to it, and that's why I love both because Luke is a certain kind of hero to me when I need that kind of hero, and Captain Kirk is another kind of hero, when you need that kind of hero in your life. So, but that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, just so everybody knows.
John, you mentioned that you have good feelings, good memories about you and your dad seeing this movie together, and when I was watching this last week, 1982 was probably a time where, father and sons did not really hug each other like they do now. And when Captain Kirk hugs his son in that moment, I was like, wow, that was pretty heavy. I mean, that's timeless, There were a lot of things in there, too, that I started getting memories of the early days of the Aliens franchise. There was this soft science fiction horror element to this. Now, you did bring up a good point because I did want to talk about this. And Jason, I want to get your take on this. Dan, of course, you as well. But The Empire Strikes Back is Star Trek, is Wrath of Khan the Star Trek's Empire Strikes Back. And John just made that mention. I feel like a lot of fans have this as their number one Star Wars film, just like Empire is number one for a lot of us Star Wars fans. Is that a fair comparison? Is there some truth to that? The Wrath of Khan being the Empire Strikes Back of the Star Trek franchise? Jason?
It's so hard for me to be the one to answer that because I think it's unfair. I look at who I call the kids today in Star Wars fandom, that think that everything that that Star Wars started from the time they started watching it, whether it be the Clone Wars or the prequels or whatever. And there's those of us that were around from nearly the beginning. In my case, they say, well, it's a bigger universe than just the prequels on or Disney Plus on or whatever the case is. So for me, yes, I could say it is, but then again, I don't have the nostalgia pull for the motion picture like Dan does. If you were a fan of it in syndication and started hearing the rumors about these characters coming back and not just coming back on the big screen, I can understand how that would really color your perception of the motion picture. I'll be honest and say that as I was sort of going backwards in my discovery of Star Trek, starting with Search for Spock and then Wrath of Khan, and then there was the motion picture, I was let down by that. And the tone of the original series and the motion picture was so different from the tone of Star Trek 2 and onward. So for me, I would liken it more to a different era of Star Trek in a way, rather than saying that, it's the best of the best. I just don't think it would be fair for me to say that because I wasn't there from day one.
But Dan, you were. So what are your thoughts on that question about it being the Empire Strikes Back of the Star Trek franchise?
As far as I'm concerned, it absolutely is. I mean, for me, Empire is still maybe the best of all the Star Wars films. And for me, The Wrath of Khan is the best of all the Star Trek films. You guys were all just saying, about the way Kirk, the way they showed Kirk in The Wrath of Khan. I mean, him with his using the glasses to read and his being kind of embarrassed that he's having to use those. And the funeral scene at the end is just, where he says his was the most human, and his voice cracks. I mean, I was just watching it a few months ago on TV, and my eyes started welling up again at that moment. I mean, it's still, I don't know how many times I've seen that movie, and I've seen that scene, 20, 30 times, and it still brought out that emotion in me when Kirk gives that, that last line as Spock's casket is being sent out into space and onto the Genesis planet. I have so many amazing memories of, like the new uniforms. I mean, we had heard that there were going to be a change in uniforms from the motion picture to The Wrath of Khan. And I had seen little bits and pieces about what they might look like, but I hadn't gotten any definitive thing. And then there was a kind of behind the scenes sneak peek on Entertainment Tonight. And they interviewed DeForest Kelley and a couple of the other cast members. And I remember that was the very first time that I saw that they had kind of like the turtleneck thing underneath and the red jacket. And, it was jarring right after the motion picture because they're so different. But I fell in love with them immediately. And I loved them. And I still love them. And I think The Wrath of Khan is the Empire Strikes Back of the Star Trek film franchise.
Yeah, I got to circle back around. Mary Jo, what was your take on this film when you first saw it?
Well, I got into Star Trek because of John. So he showed me Star Trek 4 first, and then I went back and saw 2, 6, and then the rest in order. But I loved it. And I had known Ricardo Montalban through Fantasy Island, so I was already a fan of his. And I thought he was a really worthy villain, a really worthy opponent for Kirk. So Kirk is so strong, you need to have that strong villain, and it's believable.
The one thing I would just add to everything everybody has said is the one thing that has really made the Wrath of Khan such a classic, timeless Star Wars film is Ricardo Montalban. I mean, his portrayal of Khan in the movie is so good. I mean, he's the only actor that could have brought that to life and go over the top and not have it be, silly or corny or, Ricardo Montalban is just incredible in this movie. A really amazing performance by him, and he is still he's still to me one of the best villains that Star Trek has ever created.
I completely agree with that. And he was so ready when he stepped back into this role. The first day he was filming, he had, and I think Dan, you probably know this, he had hit like 12 different points on the set when he was giving that monologue, and he hit every single one. Like he was ready.
I think we've corrected our audio issue. Jason, because you're a professional, I had to have a little flaw in tonight's show.
It would always happen, Chris.
Now, I did want to tell you guys, going back to this being the best Star Trek film, a fan favorite anyway, IMDb rates this at a 7.7 out of a 10 for what that's worth. Rotten Tomatoes, for what they're worth, 86% on the tomato meter, but a 90% on the audience meter. So again, showing that the fans truly love this film. Is it fair? Is that a fair rating, or do you think that was underscored, I should say?
One of the things that I think is important about Wrath of Khan is when it opened, the weekend that it opened, a lot of people may not realize this, it became the highest grossing opening in the history of motion pictures. It beat Empire Strikes Back. It opened at what now today seems like a paltry amount of money, but it opened at $14.3 million in box office. That was more than Empire opened in. And so it's pretty amazing. The reaction of not just Star Trek fans, but the general audience. There weren't enough Star Trek fans to generate. It's like anything else. Star Trek has always had a smaller audience than Star Wars, so it's very unusual for a Star Trek film to be a $500 million box office bonanza, but because it doesn't have that as large. It certainly has a large audience. Don't get me wrong, but it's not as large as Marvel or as large as Star Wars. And for a Star Trek film to premiere as the #1 film, not of all time, back then was quite amazing. I remember Pauline Kael, who was a notoriously difficult reviewer, and several notoriously difficult reviewers talked about how this was the way that the Star Trek should be, that this was the way a good science fiction film should be. People talked about giving Ricardo Montalban a nomination for an Oscar. It was all over the place. It was exceptionally popular beyond just Star Trek fans. I remember Mork and Mindy, if anybody remembers that show with Robin Williams, had an episode on in 1982, right before Wrath of Khan premiered, where they kind of had a beaming technology on there, so that they accidentally cross beamed, and William Shatner was on there.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, isn't that great? I love that. And the big joke was, he's there. He's obviously with, he's going to meet a girl, right? Shatner, and because he's supposed to be Captain Kirk, and they say as he beams away, they say, "Wait, I need to know, does Spock die?" I mean, this is on, a sitcom. It was really quite something that summer. I remember that summer really well, and the energy and enthusiasm around it. I don't think it's an overstatement to say, had Wrath of Khan not been successful, and it's really amazing that it was. The making of it is an incredible story. It's amazing it got done. It's amazing it got done for the insanely low price tag it got done at. It got done by the television side, in fact, of Paramount. It was produced mostly by the television side, even though it was a motion picture. And which is why Harv Bennett, who was the producer of it, because he was brought in to Paramount to shore up their television side, not their movie side, and that just happened to be Star Trek was sort of his first project for them, really. But uh, if that film had not been as successful as it was, I don't think we would not have had Star Trek 3. I mean, maybe there might have been another reiteration, but it's entirely possible Star Trek could have gone the way of many other popular franchises and just been something niche that a few people liked. And would we have had Next Generation, and would we have had the history that we have? So it's a vitally important part of Star Trek history for sure. And maybe the most important part of it, other than its original creation by Gene Roddenberry, I think. So I'd say those scores are low, but I would give it a 10. I would give it a 10 out of 10 as my, I would give it an 11 out of 10.
You're gonna go Spinal Tap on it, right?
Yeah.
Dan, you feel the same way? You feel like you give it a 10 all the way across?
I would do 11 out of 10, just like John said. To be honest, I don't know. You guys, I'm sure you all remember Siskel and Ebert when they used to have their At the Movies show. They do their
Chicago Legends.
Yes, exactly. And I just remember seeing their review of Wrath of Khan, and they both just raved about it because I expected them to just hate it, and they just raved about it and said everything. It was kind of like a nod to old sci-fi. Even they said those phasers and communicators, how they designed them was kind of a nod to more old-fashioned science fiction, and they raved about Ricardo Montalban and just how well the movie came together. And I was just like, I was in heaven because I thought, oh, these guys are going to trash it. Like they never really appreciated Star Trek in the films. And they raved about it. And that's why John and Maria's book is really timely, and it's going to be perfect for next year because it's I think personally their book's going to do extremely well because it's the story about all of the behind the scenes of everything about Wrath of Khan, and there's no better movie to do that about.
Yeah, John and Mary Jo, your book comes out. It's the making of Star Trek, Wrath of Khan, and a lot of behind the scenes story. I could imagine because it's a whole book to that. Remind us again what the release date is. I know you had said on the last show that you guys were on, it would have been better if it came out this year, but sometimes that's the nature of the business. As we know, projects take a long time to complete, and there's other people involved that slow the process down, maybe publishing and that sort of thing. But what's the date? June, right?
It's supposed to be September, although it may appear earlier at some fan conventions. So there may be a earlier edition for fans who go to certain events. But it's going to be open, generally available in September. But yeah, I tell you that one of the big challenges of doing it is that so many of the people who worked on it are no longer with us. Gain Rescher, who was a phenomenal cinematographer. Behind the scenes people, some people passed away a long time ago. But even more recently, Leonard Nimoy and Harv Bennett, and just that was a challenge. And I'll tell you, since he's here, and I think it's all very, very important. I know Dan hears me say this all the time. He's probably tired of hearing me say it, but Dan was the internet for fans before there was the internet, and both for Star Wars and for Star Trek fans, right? And
I think I've heard Jason say that too. I think we've all said that.
Yeah, Dan was our link. And there was nobody more perfect because Dan is one of us. One of us. I don't want to do it like that, but Dan is one of us. Dan is a fan. It was a business, yes, and it was run professionally, and Dan had employees and everything like that. But it was a labor of love. And I tell you, those very early. I think it was called, if my memory's wrong, please let me know, Dan. The initial, when you got the official license to do the Star Trek fan club, it was initially, the newsletter was officially the Star Trek 2 sort of fan club newsletter. It was geared around the movie first. I think I'm right about that.
That's Star Trek 2, the Wrath of Khan official fan club. It was a long name. you know. And then Star Trek 3 came out, and we changed the name again to Star Trek 3, the official fan club. And then after that, I finally went to Paramount, and I said, we can't keep changing this. It's costly to keep having to do new stationery and everything. I said, can we just call ourselves Star Trek, the official fan club? And they said, yeah, and Roddenberry signed off, yeah. And so I didn't have to change everything for each film.
Hey,
What was good, you know, I'll tell you,
I
those were
wanna go around the
so
horn
great because
on this.
I was just going to say, Chris, that those early interviews that Dan did with Ricardo Montalban and you know, the edit. In fact, I believe it may be the only interview I've ever seen of the editor
Yeah.
of Star Trek Two that I know of has ever been done was done for Dan's newsletter,
Yeah.
and so those were incredibly valuable to us because you know, you can't talk to Ricardo anymore. You can't, you know, there are people you can't talk to, and also valuable because they were in the moment. You know, that was wonderful about it. It was even before the film was out, some of these interviews were done, and so they were incredibly valuable to us. So you know, if anybody ever gets a chance, you ever in a, you know, on an eBay auction, you see those or something, where they don't come up very often, but they're worth getting. They're a real piece of history.
Yeah, Jason, I think that's one thing that you are really, really good at is capturing uh, people in the moment, actors in the right place, the right time, and it adds to, you know, what Dan has done with the magazine and with his interviews. You guys do the audio format of the interviews with a lot of the Star Wars actors, but it's nice because it's a library, it's an archive of the past. And if we don't have these things, old magazines, old interviews, old videos, things kind of get lost from a historical standpoint, you know. I want to go around the horn with this one. Favorite moment, Jason. I'm going to start with you. Favorite number one moment from the Wrath of Khan. Do you have one moment that really stands out to you?
Oh, easy, easy. The bridge scene. The bridge scene is, for me, when they're bringing the shields down on Khan's ship. That is absolutely, in my judgment, the most I don't know, the most Kirk moment I can think of. And Shatner's performance, you know, Shatner as an actor who's gotten a lot of well, let's say I think it's very unfair treatment in the press, you know, for being an over actor, a hammy actor. He's so brilliant in, well, I think he's brilliant across the board, but in particular that scene, because it's played so subtly, especially as he's peering over those glasses. And Dan made a great point earlier about, you know, he is kind of almost sheepish about having to wear the glasses. But it adds so much. And I heard a rumor, and I don't know if perhaps John or Dan can confirm that part of Nick Meyer's strategy in working with William Shatner and getting such a natural and organic performance from him was that he tired him out. I don't know. I don't remember where I heard this, but they would do take after take after take after take. And he really preferred those later takes as William Shatner sort of, I guess, just kind of became exhausted and was sort of downplaying the action as opposed to kind of, you know, sending it to the last row, you know, as this trained Shakespearean actor would have done. So, but I mean, as far as the best moment, that's my, not just my favorite moment in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, but one of my all-time favorites in all of Star Trek dealing with the original crew.
John, can you confirm that was not a rumor?
Oh yeah, well, Nick Myers the one who talked about that. Nick wrote about directing Shatner, and I don't know that William Shatner agrees with that assessment. So that's been part of it. That was part of the challenge of writing the book. Of course, there's contradictory memories of about a lot or interpretations of a lot of things. But no, yeah, that's what Jason says. That's actually from Nick Meyer himself. and how he approached that direction of it. I got to tell you, what's amazing about that film is how you never see Kirk and the villain of the piece and the hero of the piece are never ever in the same room together. Actually, they're only on screens with each other, and at no time did they ever act against each other. So there was never William Shatner was never feeding the lines to Montalban, nor was Montalban feeding the lines to Shatner. They were reacting against like script people reading the lines, and that to me just shows you how incredibly talented both Shatner and Montalban are. That we believe they're talking to one another, and by the way, also great editing. But
Yes.
that we believe they're talking to one another and they're reacting to one another, but it's all through their imagination. I mean, that they were green screening before there was really green screening, really, in the sense that they had to imagine who they were acting against, because part of the reason they needed to do that was the bridge of the Enterprise is the bridge of the Reliant. So they had to film all one ship first, and then they filmed another ship. So they weren't filming at the same time. They were filming at completely different times, and so they were never even there. They were there for a few photo shoots together. There's a few behind the scenes images where they're together, but they were not acting against one another. So that, yeah, I just think that adds to Bose Meyer's great direction, everybody's input there, even to make you believe they're two different ships. That's Gain Resher and that's Joe Jennings and that's all the behind the scenes people doing little things to make you think. 65% of that film is on the same set,
Yeah.
and you don't realize
It's called filming on a tight budget. That's for sure. Dan, what is your favorite moment, if you have one, that just really, really stands out to you as like, hey, like Jason had said, the bridge scene is like one of his all-time Star Trek moments, favorite Star Trek moments as a whole, not just from Wrath of Khan, but from the franchise. Dan, how about for you? What's your number one moment in Wrath of Khan?
Well, geez, that's hard because I could give you my favorite moments on two hands. There's so many. I still come back to with Kirk and his glasses, and he's on the bridge, and he has to look at something, and he pulls out he looks around at everybody, and he pulls out his glasses, and I think he mutters kind of stuff like, "Damn, like I'm gonna have to, everybody's gonna have to see me put these glasses on to read this," and that for me was such an moment, amazing moment. And then, the scene that once again just really got me was he and McCoy and Carol Marcus standing there at the end looking out the view screen. And I think McCoy says, "Jim, how do you feel?" And he says, "I feel young," and it's, there are moments in that movie that still give me goosebumps and can bring tears out in me. And it's, I can't say that for every one of the Star Trek films, but this one I can.
Like I said, I saw it, last week with pretty much virgin eyes, and yeah, it felt timeless. It did not feel like it was a 40-year-old movie. There were some really heavy moments, like I said, make you think. Dealing with loss and dealing with death. One of the scenes that got me, of course, when they launched Spock out into space, and they played they played Amazing Grace. I was not expecting to hear Amazing Grace in Star Trek. So it's been, like I said, if I've seen this movie before, last week, it was so long ago. It was very, very fresh. Mary Jo, what was your favorite moment from this movie?
John said it. I was going to say the same thing as you.
What did I say?
About the Kirk and Khan exchange, and how it's amazing because they were not on the, what you just said. They're not on the same stage.
I also like the moment where Kirk. My favorite line in any Star Trek actually is and this is similar to what Jason's saying in terms of, I think the intent is the same, because I like the scene. I guess we're all saying the same, most of the scene that Jason's saying, but I love it at the end when he says, he flips open the communicator, Spock, it's been 2 hours, what's going on, and he just looks up and says, "I don't like to lose." And that's just, I mean, that needs to be the mantra, I think, of every person who ever faces a challenge is, you find a way out of it. And I always love that. And the music and how they go straight to the beaming in, and then the explanation to Savick, um, of that. I just love all that. It's just very, very perfect.
Chris, you mentioned something about, you said Amazing Grace. One of the things I used to do, I did a regular interview with Harv Bennett for the magazine. And I asked him there, I said, how did you guys come up with the idea to use Amazing Grace in that? And he said, well, I was at a funeral of a friend's. And he says, all of a sudden, these two bagpipers come from the back of the church and they're playing on the bagpipes Amazing Grace. And he said the entire audience there in the church, he said, just broke down into tears and started crying. And he said, I knew right then that we needed to find a way to use that in Spock's funeral scene. And of course, Scotty was appropriate because he's Scottish. He's playing the bagpipes. And so that's how that whole came about. I mean, it was Harv Bennett who told me that he was at a church at a funeral. And he said the minute that happened, everybody in that audience just started to weep.
Yeah, it gets me every time. That's for sure. I know there are a lot of life lessons that can be learned from this film. There's a lot of great dialogue that just, like I said, it makes you think, and it's so relatable to everyday life. Maybe not when a lot of people had seen it when they were kids. To the older audience, I believe. But Jason, was there any life lesson or inspiration or quotable dialogue from this that really grabbed you?
Oh, absolutely. And the older I get, the more resonance it has. The scene with between McCoy and Kirk in Kirk's house, and he shows up on his birthday, and you get that great, damn it, Jim, other people have birthdays, why are we treating yours like a funeral? It's so good. And he says, get back your command. Get it back before you become part of this collection. And the collection he's referring to is, all of these weapons that Kirk has collected over the years. He says, get it back before you become part of this collection, before you really do grow old, because you're not old yet. I mean, that's the subtext. You're not old yet. Stop thinking of yourself as old. And that, to me, I think it's almost like that was what I learned from that was, don't retire from the thing that you love to do, the thing that drives you. And that there will be others that will be coming after you that can learn a lot from you. And that's also what Star Trek II is a lot about. You've got this very green crew on board, and they're learning from the best of the best in some of the most dire circumstances. And so I love that aspect of the movie. And, as I get older, I'm definitely thinking about those wise words of Bones McCoy in Kirk's house.
Yeah, that's a great moment. And I love the fact that, Dan, you referenced it at the beginning of the show. At the end, he goes, how do you feel? And he says, I feel young. So it kind of brings that moment full circle.
Yeah.
Dan, any life lessons or, inspiration or there's, like I said, there's so much great dialogue. What's your favorite quote? What's your favorite life lesson that you've learned from this film?
Well, I can't say it any better than Jason. I mean, I think Jason said it the best, and everything, that entire moment that he had gone over is, for me, is the same thing. Don't retire too early. Stay young. Keep your interest level up and keep things going so that you don't grow old too fast. And I agree with Jason. I think that's part of the lesson I learned in it. As far as the line goes, I mean, I like the way Savick says, you lied. And he says, I exaggerated, that's a good point. So I still love all of that. Savick was a great character. And I love both of the actresses who played Savick. I think Kirstie Alley was a great Savick to start out with. And I did the very, very, very first interview with her, and she was still filming Rathacon when I talked to her. And I still remember how excited she was. And it's still, if you go back and you can reread that issue, it's all so fresh and new and exciting to her because she hadn't even gotten any, the fans didn't even know who she was at that point. So it's a really kind of a time capsule of Kirstie Alley's a moment of being thrust into this incredible franchise.
John and Mary Jo, what about you guys? Life lesson from this? Your favorite quote that really stands out?
Well, I think you could take away from this: don't accept a no-win scenario. I love that Captain Kirk didn't do that, and he found a way to beat the Kobayashi Maru. So there's always a way.
And then I liked all the little teaching lessons in there. Jason had mentioned that there's the cadets, and everyone in the film really, there's the concept of everyone has either an actual or a symbolic child, right? Kirk has David, Khan has Yalcum, Spock has Savick, the Enterprise has the cadets, the Reliant has Khan's followers, where there's this sort of children surrounding, or young people anyway, surrounding these seasoned adults. Yes, Scotty has his nephew, Peter Preston. There's sort of a matchup in a way with a lot of the characters and so on. And so there's a lot of teaching lessons in there. Kirk, my favorite is Kirk saying we learn by doing, which is the way all schools should run. That should be the mantra of every school. We learn by doing, or just when she, when Savick, Dan was talking about Savick, when Savick says, I don't understand this. That thought hadn't occurred to me. And Kirk's like, well, now you have something new to think about. And that's, I think a lot of science fiction films, especially where you have mentors and mentees, you get a lot of great practical lessons for teachers. I love in Rise of, in Last Jedi, Yoda says one of his best teaching lessons I think ever, which is, the burden of a teacher is that the student is supposed to surpass you. And that's just a brilliant line that Yoda has in The Last Jedi. So, I love all of that. By the way, Jason mentioned all the antiques surrounding Kirk. If you look real close, on Kirk's desk is a Commodore computer of the 1980s on his desk, which they put there because it looked futuristic in 1980 or 81 when they were making it. But I guess it worked because it's one of his antiques, right? That must be why. He must collect old gaming systems and old computers. Look for it. It's right on his desk, right in front of the mirror. Right in front of the window. You'll see it.
That's cool.
Jason, going back to that scene.
That's right. Oh, Mary Jo was mentioning it. What was that?
Saturn did an ad for that computer.
Yeah, little product placement maybe.
Jason, go back to that scene that you were talking about too. I know the story of William Shatner and how he feels like there's a struggle getting old, and he does not deal with the passing of time easily. I can relate to that. Yeah, I find that fascinating, and I find that very cool that he has the same struggle that I do. But watching Wrath of Khan, I feel like that is William Shatner. That's not necessarily Captain Kirk. I mean, they're kind of one of the same in that moment, with that mindset and that philosophy about, staying young, getting old, that sort of thing. Did you guys catch that as well?
I've always thought that the line between William Shatner and Captain Kirk is razor thin. And that's what makes it so great to watch. I mean, he's perfect. He's perfect for the role. I think there's a lot of William Shatner in the character. And as the character progresses, his sort of fatalistic attitude he has about death. When I die, I'll die alone. As we see in Star Trek V, which I hope we all come back and do a Star Trek V roundtable, because I want to die on that hill and defend that movie.
I'm with you, Jason.
All right. But yeah, so you see the evolution of that character, and he does, I think, reflect that, William Shatner, the actor, that that time is something that's always chasing you and hunting you down. And I ironically, he's one of the last lived of the original cast. And maybe when he does pass in real life, he will die alone, at least from the perspective of not being surrounded by his crew. Chris, I do have to throw out one compliment here to you. We are 50 minutes into this interview, and you have yet to mention Ricardo Montalban's chest and asked if it was real, if he was just working out. So it's an amazing thing to do a panel on Star Trek II and not get not get bogged down in that question.
And I'm sure there's a lot of these kind of stories in the Tenuto's book, which is coming out next year. A little factoid, most of you probably know, Ken Ralston for the ILM, he had put together the first, I believe it was the first CGI sequence for this film. And again, the effects, when I was watching this, here's the thing. I have Paramount, the app, right? Paramount Plus, whatever they call it. I was looking for the film on there. For some reason, it's not on there. That's a big slam on them for that. It was on HBO, but I was watching this, and I'm like, is this a special edition version of this? Because I just thought that the effects in this film, for being 40 years old, were so clean and so well done. My producer, Matthew Rooney, wants to ask you guys a question. This is the last Star Wars question and the last question for the night. Before I let everybody go, and I cannot thank you guys enough for your time. But Matthew, your question for my this is like I feel like I'm presenting this bill at the Fillmore West. I mean, the guest lineup has been incredible, and I know everybody has enjoyed having all four of you guys on. But Matthew, the question that you have for them tied into Star Wars, what do you have?
Yeah, first of all, thanks all of you for doing Chris's show. I know he appreciates it, and we all appreciate it who watch Chris's show. I've sort of read, just by reading articles and things about Wrath of Khan, that a lot of folks kind of consider it to be a response to Star Wars. Like I enjoy the motion picture, and I feel like it's maybe truer to the spirit of Star Trek, or maybe Roddenberry's Star Trek, in that it's sort of more about morality, which, I mean, there's morality in Wrath of Khan as well, obviously, but there is this revenge story, which is sort of the center of it. So do you think it's fair to say that they sort of incorporated more of the space battles and the vendetta and sort of like the dueling between the two as a way to respond to Star Wars? Or do you think that that's unfounded to say?
Well, I guess I would say, but I think there's probably many interpretations of it, because there's a lot of hands in this pot, right? There's Charlie Bluedorn, who was the head of Paramount, and one of the greatest living forces in the history of entertainment. Star Trek II exists because of him. He really wanted there to be another Star Trek. He believed in the franchise. And although Star Trek I, I mean, I'm right with Dan. I love Star Trek I. There's so many great things about that movie. And it made a lot of money. I mean, a lot of people think of it, geez, since they went in such a different direction with 2, it must have been a failure. Not at all. Star Trek Star Trek the Motion Picture made a lot of money. It cost a lot of money, but it made a lot of money. But Charlie Bluedorn, when everybody else was saying, no, you can't do this again. It's just, you can't, we saw that. He believed in it, and he brought in Harv Bennett, and who eventually brings in, Robert Sallin, who, and then they bring in Nick Meyer, and there's sort of chain of people that are brought in. Star Trek II, Jack B. Sowards, who is credited with writing the script, did give a lot of what Star Trek II is, but the script is really Nick Meyer's. Mm-hmm. The words are Nick Meyer's. The intelligence of it, the cleverness of it, many of the plot elements of it are Nick Meyer's. There are some things in there. I mean, Kobayashi Maru idea, that was Jack B. Sowards. So the SETI Alpha Eels, that was Jack B. Sowards, along with Robert Sallin and others. So there's certainly elements within there. but it's really Nick Meyer's script and it's Nick Meyer's movie. And I don't think he did it as a reaction to Star Wars. I think he did it as a submarine movie.
Mhm.
That he came in and he didn't he talks about this himself. He was not a fan of he wasn't opposed to Star Trek, but he wasn't a fan. He wasn't someone who watched it and loved it, and he was aware of it and he respected it sort of for what it was. He educated himself on it fairly quickly, and same thing with Harv Bennett, right? Harv Bennett um, was against Star Trek. Literally, his show Mod Squad was beating Star Trek in the ratings. So he was a anti-producer against when Star Trek was on the air originally. But they understood the heart of what Star Trek was. I think for Nick Meyer, he wanted to tell a good story using these charming characters in a sort of submarine setting. But I don't think that it was, there has to be some connection because ILM is involved. I mean, there is a Star Wars element feeling to the effects because this is only the second film ILM ever did that wasn't a Star Wars movie. The first was Dragon Slayer, and this was one of their proving grounds to show Hollywood that they were able to do film. So, but there were a lot of challenges here that they didn't have with Star Wars. We got to interview Ken for the book, and that Enterprise model was a nightmare to work with because it wasn't designed for what they needed it to do. It wasn't like the ships in Star Wars, which were designed to move the way they needed to move. This was designed in a different way. So I guess that's my long answer is I don't think so, but I could certainly see why someone would say so, right? You got the plot of the surprise son, right? I mean, there are certain elements in there where you would go, oh, but that would be my take. I don't know if Mary Jo agrees or not, or
I was gonna say the same thing about submarine.
submarine idea.
Jason, I don't know. Maybe that's more of a question for those guys because they were there in the beginning. They were there, Empire Strikes Back. Then a couple years later, Wrath of Khan. But do you think that Wrath of Khan was maybe an answer to Star Wars doing Empire Strikes Back?
I don't know about it being an answer so much to Empire Strikes Back or Star Wars. I mean, clearly the motion picture was a response to Star Wars. I mean, that's well known that Paramount was looking, Paramount, who famously passed on Star Wars, was looking at their portfolio to say, what do we have that could perhaps make the impact like Star Wars has, and they revived Star Trek. But in terms of Wrath of Khan, I think that it's I would say maybe less of a response to Star Wars and maybe more of a response to some of the fans that might have been, to John's point and Dan's point. I mean, the motion picture was enormously successful, and I think it really tickled the nostalgia of those that were fans of the original series, and seeing them up on the big screen must have been just a huge deal for those original generations of fans. But it was a little low on action. It was a bit too cerebral. And for a television series that had some, for its time, some great action sequences and had some great action moments, I think it was more of a response to that, like bringing it back to maybe some of those more action adventure. I think Gene Roddenberry said it was Captain Horatio Hornblower, in space. So let's bring some of that action in. So just maybe more of a reaction to the motion picture than it was to Star Wars.
Sure. Dan, anything you want to add to that?
Jason's absolutely right. I think it was an answer to the more cerebral type of film that the motion picture was. There were, obviously average moviegoers and stuff. I used to talk to them all the time back then, and they'd say, man, that movie is slow. How can you like that movie? And I really do think that it was a bit of an answer to let's get some more action, let's get some more excitement into another Star Trek movie. So I do think Jason's right. It was an answer to the motion picture rather than an answer to their version of Star Wars. That was the motion picture, and it wasn't anything like Star Wars.
Well, hey guys, I value your time, I value your friendship, and I value you guys being on the show. Don't forget to check out the Tenuto's behind the scenes book, making of Wrath of Khan, that comes out next year. Jason Swank, people can listen to you weekly on Rebel Force Radio. You guys are on YouTube. You guys are also on Patreon. And you guys are also available wherever people can grab podcasts. And Jason, thank you for taking the time to talk Star Trek and not Star Wars tonight.
Thanks for inviting me. This was a real thrill and an honor to be on with such an esteemed panel. I can't wait to get the book this fall. Or next year. It'll be great. Excited. And
Dan, thank you again for being the Google before Google, the internet before the internet. Dan, do you have anything in the works coming out? And you're always a busy guy. You always have something up your sleeve.
I'm working on a book about all of my stories through all of the different franchises that I've been involved with. And that's the only thing right now, other than just doing my daily work and posting on my Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. So people want to check out what I'm doing, that's where they'll find it first.
Yeah, Dan, and I'm loving your Facebook stuff, because you're not only unearthing some really cool photos from your personal stash, but also the stories that go along with it. So I'm looking forward to seeing this in a book form coming to Amazon. Tonight. Remember, guys, we have 2 shows right after Thanksgiving. We're doing the Andor Season 1 wrap, and then we're doing a Galaxy's Edge experience share on Saturday during the holiday weekend. So I want to thank my producer, Matthew Rooney, and I want to thank all my producers for Machtails from the Cantina that might not be involved in the show day to day, but you guys are involved in a financial level that really helps me find the time to do these shows that you guys enjoy so much. So, hey, we'll catch you next time on Machtails from the Cantina. Another round live. Be well, be safe. We'll see you next time. So long, everybody.